This is the beginning of our series that we will present this month on the subject of the great psychologist and occultist Carl Jung. And so this is only the beginning. Therefore, if you are not satisfied, you don't have to come back, see? So it's as simple as that. Yeah. In any event, as a general introduction, which I never do, I say too that you are undoubtedly aware that you are in the quarters of the Besant Lodge, the Hollywood Theosophical Society, and that we co-occupy this with the Gnostic Church, where we have our services primarily on Sunday, and that being Gnostics who were here the last time, 25 years ago or so, we feel that it is within our right to be a little bit late, because we are too early 2,000 years ago. So now we are often late. And you may keep that in mind, but one of the reasons for that is just a boundless compassion for you, because we know that the parking is abominable around here, and that it is in part our own fault for not having had more money to buy a lot for parking or something of that sort, and all of those things we should apologize for, but we won't apologize, but merely tell you that you're happy that you're here. No, real good. My name, thank you. My name is Stephan Hoeller, who has been an active member of the Theosophical Society for over 60 years, and who has been a Gnostic for maybe 2,000 years. But in any event, I am the one who currently is in charge, even though at my age, which will be 93 years old in a few weeks' time, perhaps that shouldn't be so, but I just don't feel like giving up. So why should I, you know? In any event, we are so glad that you are here and that you have an interest in the great and mysterious prophetic figure of certainly the 20th and we might say even of the 21st century, Carl Gustav Jung. In that respect, it is always useful, although not always welcome, to indicate what little connection I may have had with Dr. Jung and his teachings. I have never met Carl Gustav Jung personally, even though I lived only across the Alpine divide in Austria for many years. And one time I even managed to get over to Switzerland, to Zurich, at which time, sitting, I don't know, with somebody in a car, I was told, oh, look over there, look at the man who is coming out of the building, that's Dr. Jung. So that was my contact, my personal contact with Jung. But of course, since then I have met a good many people who had much personal contact with him, and one of them I will just mention. In any event, my encounter with Jung on a spiritual plane, let us say, was certainly a very, very important event in my life, and I will be always grateful to have encountered this prophetic figure in order to complete my picture of the esoteric tradition which I have entered. And so when I gave this evening's talk, the peculiar and probably unusual title of the Theosophy of C.G. Jung, I meant thereby that C.G. Jung represented a tradition that way back in the early Alexandrian period was named by the Neoplatonist teachers Theosophia, the wisdom of God, or the wisdom of the gods, and which then acquired a new fame, if not exactly even notoriety, which we don't mind, when a bunch of Americans and Britishers and other strange people like that in the year 1875 got together in New York City and decided to form an association which they called in honor of Ammonius Saccus, the great Neoplatonic teacher who coined the name Theosophy, the Theosophical Society. So what I indicate that while obviously when a name has been so powerfully and at length associated with a particular approach to life and similar concerns, that there would be a specificity to a name of this sort. And so since 1875, the word theosophy came to be understood generally and in the public mind more and more as an association of people who are interested in the occult or esoteric tradition and who for the most part derived much of their literature and their teaching from the Russian female magus, as I like to call her, which is very bad Latin, because magus is masculine, and she lived in a time when the masculine and the feminine were still distinguished from each other, perhaps a little more clearly than they are at the present time. In any event, let's say, it now has acquired a specific name of an orientation that to a considerable extent, although not entirely, goes back to Madame Blavatsky and her successors in the field, Dr. Annie Besant, C.W. Leadbeater, Gottfried de Perucker, and many others, but which is on the other hand a name, a denomination of an approach to reality, which brings, or at least it is hopefully brings wisdom to the individual. And that wisdom, as Ammonius, who was, by the way, a most interesting fellow himself, I wish somebody would write a good biography of him, which would be possible, because ancient Alexandria's story is increasingly available in various fine books, one of which I received as a gift just recently. But let us say it is an open secret that when Ammonius called it the wisdom of the gods, he was referring to a wisdom, a state of consciousness which appertained to a species in advance of the human, which is the gods and the goddesses were regarded as in ancient times, and quite rightfully so. After all, we haven't been on Mount Olympus, we haven't seen Zeus and Aphrodite, except perhaps in our dreams, and therefore we don't really know for sure what those old boys and girls saw. But they saw and experienced some great and wonderful things which they wanted to pass on to posterity. And so even as late as at the beginning of the last quarter of the 19th century, there occurred, let us say, a revival, a rekindling of an ancient flame, which the exact origins we would not be able to discern at this time, but which in some fashion has been in the world for countless ages, and is still here in various expressions, one of them being the one that we have used, and some of our founders of the Gnostic Church and the Gnostic Society for a number of decades, and which is that of Gnostic, which means someone who knows, because gnosis in Greek means a certain kind of knowledge. It is not the kind of knowledge that is acquired by being memorized out of books, but rather it is a knowingness which arises deeply within the human psyche, within the human mind itself, in which points to realities other than the ones ordinarily acquired on earth. And so in this sense, I think if I have grandiloquently referred to the theosophy of C.G. Jung, I probably haven't done Jung or theosophy really any harm by doing so, because I think there are enough outstanding qualities in both of these fields of activity and study which are worth remembering and which certainly can be understood as pertaining to this latest representative, let us say, in modern times of the esoteric tradition. Now, that being the case, we need to perhaps keep in mind, even though it's not particularly important, that the year 1875, being the beginning of the last quarter of the 19th century, carried a sort of important keynote, which in many ways is still with us. One of these was undoubtedly the founding of the Theosophical movement in New York City in November of 1875, but of course others. It was a year when one of the signal teachers in modern times of the esoteric movement, the French writer and Kabbalist Eliphas Levi, left his physical body in Paris and went back, no doubt, to one of the higher Sephirot of the Kabbalah to rest. For after doing what he did, after calling attention to the esoteric tradition by way of the, you might say, the two buzzwords, one of them being Kabbalah, or Kabbalah, as it is pronounced in Hebrew, because of all the languages that I was browbeaten into studying. That was one, but I only had about 2 years of Hebrew. So 8 years of Latin, about 4 years of Greek. So it's amazing that I have even the minimal sanity that I still possess, but somehow I hung on to it for dear life. In any event, let us say the passing of Eliphas Levi, the founding of the Theosophical Society, which came to be a movement with far greater effect upon the thought in the world, not only the Western but the Eastern as well, if you look at India, and on the other hand also the revival among all sorts of people, including those of the Jewish religion, of the Kabbalah, which of course is the particular and specific embodiment really of that esoteric tradition within the matrix of the Jewish faith and of the Jewish culture, which is, I think, worth remembering. Now then, all of that being the case, we may try to keep in mind, if we so please, that the opinion has persisted in circles of the esoteric tradition about as far as we can trace them, that from time to time in history there are people who come forth from the four corners of the world and from various scholarly and spiritual disciplines whose work serves to revivify and carry forward this esoteric tradition. Now, why this is so, with any certainty I wouldn't be able to tell you. I can tell you my opinion, which is largely what I'm talking about here anyway. But let us say my opinion being that for a very, very long time, probably much longer than we are able to calculate, there has been an alternative mystical or esoteric tradition in the world. And in various ways, depending on the cultural and historical circumstances, we discover this tradition. A little metaphor which I have used before and which I tend to attribute to Joseph Campbell, also I'm not so sure, I'm egotistical enough to claim authorship for it myself, although I have a great deal of respect for Joseph Campbell. And that is a little metaphorical picture of maybe a desert countryside, which you can easily see if you take a trip to southern Arizona and various other places, and there you will see that, of course, great desolation, everything is dry, everything is sand, hardly any, the tiniest green thing that pops up. And then if you keep looking, you see that there is maybe a serpentine path showing forth from the sand, and along that line, along that path, there is unusually and miraculously a green stripe. There are little trees, there are little plants, there are cacti, all kinds of things, but only along there. And from this circumstance you can deduce, I think, with some degree of certainty, that this is due to the fact that there is an underground body of water, underground creek or river of some sort, which furnishes liquid nourishment to these plants. Now, this is an image, and the images are sometimes helpful and sometimes boring, and I hope that this is more on the helpful side, namely that where there is a certain nourishing substance for the plants, or in our case, for consciousness, for the mind, for the soul, there is life. Where such circumstances do not exist, well, let's say life assumes a very low form. Here and there may be a sleepy bug walking along or something of that sort, but not anything else. So now it is my conviction, based on study and experience, that it is very likely that from times immemorial there has been in this world such a tradition which carried a meaning, a transformative impact on the souls, on the minds of people who managed to come across it, and that this was, because of its very nature, somewhat secret, although not entirely secret at all times, and that therefore from a certain time on in history, because of some writers, probably the main one having been Madame Blavatsky, it came to be called the inner, the esoteric tradition. Esoterikos in Greek meaning inward, exoterikos meaning outward. Now, after all that didactic haranguing here, let's say obviously there was always a difference. Not so much a difference in kind, but a difference in degree. In the degree of the intensity of the experiences and the teachings available in the exoteric and conversely in the esoteric tradition that deserved those names. And they were to the effect that some people, for a variety of reasons that vary greatly, some people had the predisposition toward an experiencing and consequently a communicating about that which is inward, which is secret. Secret in a sense that it is not generally available, but not secret in the sense that somebody came along with a great big key and locked it up so you can't have it. Quite to the contrary. The secret, no, let's see, the key to the secret has always been within the human being. Those who are inwardly available to see more meaning in life than is ordinarily there, who have a kind of consciousness that tends toward the concealed, the occult, because occultus means hidden or so. They are the ones who are, let's say, gathered by their own inclination toward this tradition. Well, there are others who are not. And one should be very careful not to arrive at value judgments on this basis. Because good people, useful people, good citizens of countries, whatever else, good, charitable people, compassionate people, can be found in following the exoteric tradition. Look at all the fabulous individuals who are listed, let us say, in the records of the saints of both the Roman Catholic Church and of the Eastern Orthodox Church. I have just been lent a fabulous book which I am very enthusiastic about, but of which I don't remember the title. Now let us see, I think it is called They Flew, and it is not about various species of birds, but it is mostly about Catholic saints, led by Saint Teresa of Avila, La Madre, if you ever studied the Spanish saints, the Great Mother, and others. Certainly the saint after whom the nice wine tasting station and country in North Central California, Cupertino, is named. The saint, is it St. John Cupertino or is it St. Joseph Cupertino? Well, what the heck, they're both good names. So in any event, these are probably the two most prominent who were distinguished so in such an outstanding way by the curious and atypical phenomenon of rising up into the air and flying when in a state of ecstasy. And in fact, if you are a moviegoer a movie watcher, whatever you are, you may remember what I thought was a lovely sort of smallish movie a number of years ago called The Reluctant Saint, with, let's see, the actor with a German name.
Max von Sydow?
Max von, not Sydow. Anyway, he'll come to me in the leading role, and which is the light of the Saint of Cupertino, and very lovely, and very from what I can see, also very well put together. In any event, so let us say these really unusual and startling phenomena that occur among some of the representatives of the mystical and of the esoteric tradition are certainly worth paying attention to, and one might almost conjecture that these phenomena were there in their lives and activities maybe in order to get attention, that the esoteric calls attention to itself from time to time by saying, look, I've got something unusual, see? There is something unusual here that you don't know about yet. So come on along and let's see if we can show it to you. Maybe you yourself can experience some of this. In fact, that is ultimately what you should do, because in these matters and in spiritual matters in general, there is nothing like experience. A little experience that wouldn't be considered much of anything by most people may be worth a colossal experience in another sphere, because it may open a mysterious door. If this is possible, if this can be done, if this has been done, if I have experienced this, then it exists. And maybe the reason that I get a little bit forceful about these things is because, along with a lot of people, and I don't claim any outstanding qualities in that regard, I have experienced a few of these things. And as such, you know, you can take me to the Inquisition, you can twist my head backward, you can do whatever you like to do to a poor Hungarian guy, but I will never deny those, because they were more real than real, and they remain as a substratum of experienced reality in my consciousness, and whenever I should be even the slightest bit tempted to say, well, you know, all of this stuff, spirits and ghosts and whatnot, they probably don't exist. Then there's a strong voice, not a little voice inside of me that says, what are you talking about? Don't you remember? Yes, sir. So, you know, that is the voice of experience. So, I wandered away a little bit from Carl Jung by now, although he certainly had the most unusual experiences, of which he reported quite voluminously and with much conviction in some of his works, especially the great prophetic work of comparatively recent publication, which I'll probably ask for somebody with a wheelbarrow, and I'll bring the red book, because for anybody to carry that is an invitation for hernia, which Jung, being a medical doctor, certainly wouldn't wish on anybody. So let us say, all right, coming that far. So that being the case, it may be expecting a little too much of most people to accept the proposition that at fairly regular intervals in the history, the known history of the world and of the culture. Everywhere, both in the East and in the West, from India to China to England to America to Russia, there have appeared people who had the qualifications to represent this esoteric tradition. Why? Because they experienced it. And because of their experiences, they informed themselves as much as they could about what they have just experienced. And so we have from time to time predictions, foretellings of possible future events, which are to the effect that yes, at such and such a time or in such and such a century, there will come someone who will continue teaching, informing, inspiring about this tradition. And one of the persons of comparatively recent times, although for us it is still past history, was Madame Helena Petrovna Blavatsky of the Theosophical Society, and I am straining my geriatric memory, but saying that she said that I'm trying to recall her words, but I will undoubtedly garble them, that in the 20th century, in century the 20th as she wrote it, there will come someone who will bring forth a new disclosure about the esoteric tradition, and then which is really seemed very, very strange to me that word should be put in. Then she says, and it will be of the greatest interest to psychologists. How they even knew the word psychology at that time? You know, one person who wrote about it, without knowing all that much about it, although he was a great scholar, was the American philosopher William James. And I think he was the one who fought for the proposition that psychology should be taken out of the field of philosophy, which it was at that time. I remember, I'm not that old, but I remember the psychological textbooks, which and the philosophical textbooks which included psychology, the science of the soul. So in any event, that has certainly some relevance. But let's say, here was Madame Blavatsky predicting there would be someone coming who would be very important in disclosing material in this field, and that his teachings would be particularly relevant to psychologists. Now, of course, they were, because we are talking about a psychologist himself. In any event, and so in the same year, when the Theosophical Society was founded, in the same year when Eliphas Levi went into the Garden of Paradise to remain there, and if you don't mind it, because I like to shock you when I can, I say also the year when Edward Alistair Crowley was born in England. In that same year, there was born in Switzerland a preacher's son, whose name was Carl Gustav Jung, who came from a long lineage of preachers. His grandfather was a very famous minister of the Swiss Reformed Church. He was the head of the biggest church, sort of like would be a cathedral in a Catholic country in Basel, whose name was, I think, also Gustav Jung, and then his own father being one too. And I think when he was a little child, there were no less than 9 ministers in his family. How the little kid survived that many preachers, I don't know, but it already indicates, I think, a very strong character to do that. In any event, there came finally the man who placed the tradition, at least in my opinion, I mean, I'm certainly not the only one, into a context that was new. And obviously that was very important and very welcomed by some people, because within that context there was no teaching of that sort. So to very quickly try to sort this out without boring you too much, let's say when it came to the 19th century, middle of the 19th century, 1848 and 1849, to be certain about it, then a new and peculiar twist came upon the world of spiritual inquiry and seeking, which really wasn't there before. Now, I don't mean that phenomena of that sort that I'm going to mention about now did not occur, but the context, the movement, the way it spread, the way it converted people, the phenomena that it caused were not here. And that came to be known, heaven knows why, as spiritualism. There is only one branch of it, let us say, that took the name to begin with in France as Spiritism, and still kept it, and now is mostly practiced in Brazil and in some French-speaking countries. L'espiritism, which makes sense in France because an esprit is a spirit. So a spiritist is someone who deals with spirits, which is really more accurate than somebody who's spiritual, because there you have various nuances. In any event, to make it very quick, what happened was that in the United States, in a little hamlet called Hydesville, New York, somewhere up there pretty close to the where all the interesting things are in the what valley?
Hudson.
The Hudson Valley, you got it, thank you, yes. So there were two sisters, Kathy and Maggie Smith, more American and more uninteresting names I haven't come across lately. In any way, the Smith sisters living out on a farm, Hydesville, New York, is not exactly a metropolis. However, they became aware of some curious manifestations, some curious activities in their farmhouse where they lived. So they were curious. If you lived in Hydesville, New York in 1848, you'd be doggone curious too, because a more boring life is probably too difficult to invent. So in any event, they said, okay, we got to find out what this is. There's something here, there's something moving around, there are some noises, there's some, activity of an other than physical nature going on in this house. So they became the first two, what came to be called mediums, because as this particular occupation spread, that meant that there were some people who considered themselves and were considered by others as sort of mediators, links between this physical world wherein we live and the spirit world, a world that is non-physical, but that is just as real as the physical, and that possibly, if properly studied and contemplated, may have some things to say to us. And so they started dialoguing with a spirit that apparently was the spirit, allegedly, of a human who lived there years ago, was buried somewhere around there, but he was kind of restless on the other side, and so he came along and wanted to talk to the two nice American girls. So can't really blame him. So then this opens a strange door, which no doubt, if you research it very thoroughly and go into all kinds of historical records, folkloristic records, anthropological, cultural anthropological records, you will find some kinds of report of them throughout the ages. And it is interaction, primarily verbal, but not entirely, with entities that claim to be the souls, the spirits of the dead. And that is why it came to be called a spiritualism. And as these things sometimes happen, apparently the experiences of the two girls happened at the right time. Because as soon as they began chattering about it in the neighborhood and so forth, and other people listened to it, hey, it was as if the heavens have descended. Everywhere there were spiritualists. Everywhere there were so-called seances, which is just a French name for a sitting, séance. But in any event, whatever you want to call it, people began to have interaction, verbal and otherwise, with spirits, who for the most part claim to be the spirits of dead people, which is after all a fairly credible story. So, if I were a spirit and somebody came to me and asked me, well, who are you, where do you come from, I would rather identify that I am the spirit of Stephan Hoeller than identify myself that I am, I don't know, the spirit of someone who was executed in Sing Sing, being in the state of New York. So obviously, let's say that there was a curious desire on both sides. The people here on earth wanted to talk to spirits, and the spirits, whoever they were, wanted to talk to people. So when two people want to talk to each other, I would prophesy that eventually they would get to talking to each other, unless they are of a totally different languages and can do it. So in any event, this was the beginning of spiritualism, which swept over particularly the Western world like a huge tidal wave from the fjords of Norway to the Tierra del Fuego in South Africa. Everywhere were spiritualist seances and mediums. Now, that being the case, what we need to remember, most of, as I say, I have been a member of the Theosophical Society for more than 60 years, so I consider myself as much as a theosophist as anybody else, at least. And let's say, I have been to seances. I know up to a considerable extent what it is about, and so forth. Let us say it became increasingly a matter that people talked about, that people wrote about, that were big columns in the daily newspapers, New York Times, Chicago Tribune, all over the place. Christian Science Monitor maybe, because that started a little bit later. Anyway, so all of a sudden it was the big thing. And when you have a big thing, whether it's a controversial election, like the one that we are looking forward to with very mixed feelings, let us say, whether it's that or something else, there is excitement. And the excitement in America is manifest how? Money, 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 money. And so at the seances, some modest money was collected, but millionaires, big ones, famous people, rich people, exciting people, all became interested in spiritualism and brought money. They built buildings, they started spiritualist churches because of the freedom of religion that we have here, and a big movement was on its way. Now, once again, to make the long story a little bit shorter, let's say what happened was that, as this often occurs in similar situations, the people who were attracted to the spirit, not necessarily to the spiritualist movement as much as to the spiritualist phenomena. These people sort of could be divided into two big groups. There were those to whom spiritualism became their religion. And you might say the spirits of the dear departed, which was a way that I like to refer to them. What's so dear about them, I don't know. But let's hope they are dear. And so in any event, you know, the dear departed and so forth, it was just sort of like a new assembly of saints and of angels that you could talk to. And considering how dull conversations with most humans are in any period of history, no matter how boring life can be when you just associate with live people, that definitely indicates it would be fun to talk to the dead people. It would be fun to have them talk to you. At least it would be different. And it was. It was. So now, however, let us say, who did this new activity attract? Well, as you mentioned before, so often just ordinary people, farmers and so forth, but on the whole it attracted people who were ready for and looking for something other and something more than they were experiencing in their ordinary lives. This was something new, this was something different, this was something exciting. And they wanted it, my precious, as Tolkien would say. So that being the case, now let's say the two groups. One of them is people who wanted another church. They read the Bible, and every spiritualist seance, and I haven't been to too many. One I have been had a Bible there. Even I went to a Spanish language seance, a big book on the. What is this? Oh, say, La Biblia, Señor, La Biblia. So you know, very, very churchy. Hymns were sung, all this sort of thing. But on the other hand, there were others, many of them really high-powered individuals, scientists like Sir William Crookes, many others, and just basically adventurous spirits themselves. I use the term spirit now for a living human. Adventurous souls, people who wanted to have more out of life than they ordinarily would. People who may be on their own as little children, like happens, because it happens to us, happened to me, probably happened to quite a few of you, already as children came in touch with the so-called invisible worlds, the invisible worlds becoming visible, and then afterwards, if you go seance and something, and say, "Oh yeah, well, I know what this is all about. I saw them in my father's garden, as I did." But anyway, so that sort of thing. So all kinds of people came together who had an increasingly vital interest in these things. All right? Now let's take a big jump. And let's jump to, to the medical profession, which maybe in the wake of epidemics and things has a less great reputation now than it did before. But whatever the case may be, obviously the scientists, not only medical people, but cooks were physicists. There were people from all kinds of scientific fields who were attracted to this curious phenomenon. And among them, probably more frequently than any other, what nowadays we call psychiatrists, namely medical doctors who specialized in mental illnesses and so forth. And they were very interested in spiritualism. There were a number of very prominent, what now we call psychiatrists. I think in those days I would call them alienists. So an alienist is not somebody who is interested in the aliens in the saucer, but who is interested in the aliens in the insane asylum. Maybe the two have something in common. Huh? You can tell that I am not the biggest saucer fan in the world. In any event, so the alienist. In any event, among them, quite a few, I don't want to load you down with names, but Germans, English, French, famous psychiatrists really became interested in these phenomena. And since they were scientists and they had that healthy scientific curiosity, they were interrogated, well, has this sort of thing been happening before? And they said, oh yes, sure. Not exactly the same, but similar things have happened before. And from that, some who were very prosaic-minded deduced, oh well, that means that all the mediums are cuckoo, crazy, meshuggah, verricht, des fous, whatever you want to call it. That's French, by the way. It's not cat language, fou. But in any event, it was somewhat of a large insult to a considerable group of people. But soon it began changing. The doctors, the professors in the medical schools and so forth came to discover, yes, there is a lot of fakery, there is a lot of fantasy that is going on here, but it's not all of that nature. There is something there that is worth looking at. And so they became interested in that, which eventually came to be called parapsychology, meaning beyond psychology, in order to discover what these phenomena really are, how they originate, and things of that description. One of these people was a young medical student in Switzerland, lest you already gave up on me ever saying anything about Jung, since I talked about everything else. There was a young medical student who soon, was quite brilliant, and who also found a big professor in the psychiatric world, Professor Hoeller, who was the head of one of the big mental hospitals. This was the era of the huge mental hospitals with thousands of patients, indicating that there were a lot of people who needed them, but let's say also various other reasons. In any event, this young man was called Gustav Jung. And Jung was therefore definitely very greatly interested in medicine, and especially the medicine of the mind, but he was also interested in these strange parapsychological phenomena. Where do they come from? And as people did, I have seen some of that back in the old country too, usually with pretty old people as old as I am now, because they remembered the spiritualist days, how exciting that was. So here these old timers with the big Hungarian pipes and stuff, sitting around in the afternoon summer sunshine, and moving the Ouija boards around and various other things. Well, we used to do that when we were 20 years old. I don't see why we shouldn't do it now. And they had a lot of fun with it. So let us say the interest was there at various levels. Not with people like Jung. It was, let's say, I would say it had two. I hope Carl Jung won't punish me for it when he meets me now or when I go to where he went. But let's say Carl Jung had various reasons for this. One of them was what we might call a spiritual reason, even a religious reason. Because after all, he went to church every day with his father, and he listened to his father's sermons and everything, so that he wanted to know. People talk about the spirits of the dead and so forth, so what is it really? A real Gnostic wants to know. I don't just want to hear about it, I want to know. Now then, in order to pursue that knowledge, and the others are scientific reasons, because after all, the spiritualists did perform, and as other people did too, some miraculous things. Things would float around in the seance room, this, that, and the other thing. So, let us say, such were the interests of young Jung. And Professor Hoeller, his chief at the hospital and others, they were also interested, because that was a kind of thing that people were interested in. Now people are interested in what Dummkopf is going to get into the White House. I would think that I would rather be interested in the spirit world than in that. But we have to do what we have to do. So in any event, one thing that Jung did that is of interest, he came from a large family. He had a fairly large family himself, several daughters and one son, eventually. But let's say he had a large family, and among that family there was a cousin. And this cousin was, I don't know what other word to invent, she was psychic. She was responsive to these things. So Jung said, aha, we'll get our own medium, we'll get our own psychic. So he got the various people of the family and friends together, and they would get together and have seances. And some of the stuff that came out of the seances was really fascinating, you know. But already it was a time when the spiritualists found out that just getting Grandpa to come in a seance and tell you, you know, what's it like in heaven, in the heavenly form country or something like that, became boring for people, and so you had kind of more, you know, more interesting things coming through. And all of a sudden you had people, for instance, there was one, it was very famous medium, I think she was also in the French part of Switzerland, and she wrote a great big tome, boring as all heck, called Des Indes le planète Mars, from India to the planet Mars. And they didn't have any rocket ships, so obviously. So what was that about? Hey, this was about a spiritualist reincarnation. So here is the spirit from India who eventually reincarnates on the planet Mars, which incidentally is not all that untheosophical, because Madame Blavatsky said, you don't have to reincarnate on this earth. No. But there are all kinds of circumstances, all kinds of things that you might get into. You might end up on another planet, might be much more interesting than here. You know, things of that sort. These people had a wider view. Nowadays, no, you got to reincarnate, and then you have to experience all that karma, and have to lead a real miserable life next time, because you made it so miserable in this lifetime for others. See, so Jehovah gets in, you know, the Punisher, the one who gives the retribution. I got to know old theosophical gentleman, very nice man, terribly excited once. I didn't quite get him mad, but I couldn't shut him up about karma, you know. And then finally I said to him, Jack, and Jack just died, in fact, not very long ago, God bless him. Anyway, I said, Jack, you know, you renamed Jehovah, and you renamed him karma. See, you have to have a punisher. You have to have somebody with the cat o' nine tails beating you up. So that's what you're doing. He didn't like it very much, but he still remained a pretty good friend, which is to his credit rather than to mine. In any event, so now things like this from India to the planet Mars. And now the Jung's cousin was doing, I think what she mostly was doing was automatic writing. You know, it's just when you feel that some force overtakes your body, and then you start writing. And you hardly know what you are writing afterwards. You say, geez, did I write this? You know, that sort of thing. In any event, she did this automatic writing, and in it also there were lives of her that were in strange and exotic lands. And she drew beautiful mandala-like structures that were supposed to be various cosmic constellations where there are various souls and so forth. So apparently a multi-talented young lady who really fascinated her relatives and those who sat with her, and Jung became convinced that something was going on. something important was going on, that this was not made up. This was not a stage magician performing for his and for his relatives' benefit. And as such he said, well, there is something happening here. At the same time, he was not convinced that the explanations offered by the medium for the events were accurate. But nevertheless, that something was going on. Out of all of which came Jung's conviction that there was, I'm trying to recall a Shakespearean verse, there was more in heaven and earth than appears in your philosophy to the world. There was a lot of interesting material there which might be interpreted differently, but which was nevertheless at a certain level quite real. So that was sort of maybe the first, and this went on for months and months and months that they had these seances and enjoyed themselves in that fashion. Well, when you are sitting in the winter in Switzerland or the snow and the ice and eating cheese, you want to have something exciting going on, and they sure did. Now then, the reason I'm bringing this up, that let's say there was a predisposition in the public mind, but more intense and more powerful in the minds of really creative and insightful people concerning the mystery that is beyond the veil of the physical world. And it was very widespread and everywhere. But heck, talking to my parents, my father particularly, who was quite a bit older than my mother, so he experienced the pre-World War period much better. He said, well, people would have seances in their living rooms. People would have seances in the taverns. So would you like to organize a barroom science here? That would be interesting, seance here. In any event, there was a lot of stuff going on. And all of this convinced whom? Not the desperately religious people who wouldn't let go of their rosaries no matter where they went or whatever the case may be, because there is that anxious religiosity too, and that usually doesn't lead anywhere. But others, but others who the creative edge of society is the one that becomes interested in spirits, in psychism, in theosophy, in yoga, and I guess I could be here reciting until you all get up and go. So the fact of the matter was that it was particularly the more creative, the more inventive, the more I'm using the word in the non-political sense, progressive people who became interested in these matters, because it indicated to them the presence of another reality, or maybe more than one reality. And I don't know whether you had that experience or that you had this, but when you begin to discover that there is another reality than the one that you were raised with, it is a very big discovery. It is truly big. And it is the source of creativity. The amount of literature produced by spiritualists and psychical researchers was an awful lot. So in any event, Jung, along with everybody else, had an interest. But not only Jung had the interest. And I think I mentioned this, I'm going to cut down on telling the incident, but I think I mentioned it once before, the famous first meeting between Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud. Because believe it or not, Sigmund Freud was also very interested in the psychic, in the spiritualist, in the other world. But he pursued it, but he was beating his chest. But of course I don't believe that stuff. I just go there, see, oh yeah, sure, of course. So Jung went to visit Freud in Vienna, young Jung, and they had a nice conversation and they got along quite well. And then Freud, and he could get quite voluble, quite preachy. And so he said, well, he says, but this is all right. I mean, you have scientific interest in these things, but he says the terrible thing is that a black flood tide of occultism is going to come and get hold of the culture. So Jung said, well, occultism is around, but I don't really see the black flood tide. What are you so concerned about? These are not bad people. Oh, yeah, so but it's totally contrary to the scientific spirit. It makes people superstitious again. We are going back into the Middle Ages, so old Papa Freud was pretty upset. So then Freud was sitting there with his cigar. Oh, he smoked nice little short, thick cigars. I wish we could get them here. In any event, so Jung said to him, well, Dr. Freud, I'm sorry to disagree with you, but these things happen. He says, I know that they happen. This is not a pure pack of rice. These things happen. And moreover, he looked at Freud and said, one of them is going to happen here right now. So Freud almost swallowed his cigar. What are you talking about? What you are talking about, Jung? And that gave a tremendous knock, but as if it had been inflicted with a big axe or something of that sort. It was emitted by Freud's, either his bookcase or his desk. He had a beautiful big desk on which stood, I think, no less than 60 pagan gods. Egyptian gods, Roman gods, Greek gods, and I think also Jung once chided him for that. Oh, he said, I thought that you have been told thou shalt have no other gods beside me. But in any event, that was not the important. The important thing was that Freud jumped up and with tears in his eyes, he said, Jung, I don't know how you do this thing, but please stop it, please stop it. So he said, all right, Dr. Freud, certainly, but I just wanted to show you that these things exist. So let's say the occult had stretched out its arm already to that early period of psychoanalysis. And now it's quite understandable that a good many, certainly not a majority, but a good many of Freud's disciples also had an interest in spiritualism and occult phenomena. And so it really fueled the oncoming occult revival, which was already going on in various ways in Paris and elsewhere, with the great occultists like Papus and Master Philippe, and before that Eliphas Levi and so forth. So there was developing out of out of the mass of people interested in occult matters, there arose a stratum of people who were interested, you might say, in the spiritual aspect of the spirits, who saw the possible emergence here of a spiritual tradition, which perhaps has been here before, and which is the esoteric tradition. So, and among them was Jung. So that Jung then, when he wrote his first heretical book, Heretical in the Eyes of Sigmund Freud, which was called German Wandlungen und Symbole der Libido, the changes and the symbols of the libido. Libido is a Latin name, really meaning pleasure. We even now talk as he had a libidinous good time when when he was watching the porno movie or something like that, libido. In any event, but it became a term for psychic energy. In fact, I think it was Dr. Esther Harding, the great Jungian analyst, British, but resident in New York, who was the first one who came up substituting for the term libido the name psychic energy, which I think was very good. I had a good friend who was a practicing Jungian analyst in New York and a practicing Episcopal priest, Brewster Beach, God rest his soul. Brewster said that Dr. Harding was the brightest light on the Jungian horizon at that time. When Jung came to America, he stayed with Dr. Harding at her house. They were that friendly with each other. But she was very much the English lady, and she knew how to give you a withering look if she felt that you were saying or doing or wishing to do or say something that she didn't like. Incredible lady. In any event, she came up with the term psychic energy. But let us say, these are the reasons behind the. What are the things that are in the theater? The things that Nikolai Röhrig painted for the ballet, sets like for behind the theater sets of their particular preoccupations. A lot of people became more and more interested in these matters. And as I say, Jung actually demonstrated to Freud that he could cause some phenomena of this sort. He never really explained that. Oh, he said, well, yeah, sometimes I do that, and I have been doing it all my life. It's nothing that unusual, so don't get so excited about it. And that's pretty much where he left it. Although, as you read later on about his life, really strange and miraculous experiences continued to occur to him. So now, especially since just a few years ago, the appearance of the Red Book, or the Liber Novus, which was the title of it in Latin, the New Book, which is kind of an interesting thing. There are lots of books around, but I am writing for you guys, or for myself, the new book, the Liber Novus. Jung could be pretty tricky. In any event, all of these, let's say, show the indication that Jung had a contact with the inner world. he never billed himself as a medium, although his cousin who appeared in these sessions did call herself a medium, but he made no big deal out of it, and said that yes, I have various experiences and I worked those into my books. But then in came the birds of doom. Ah, Dr. Jung, if you do those things, they're going to put you down as a cheap spiritualist. You're not going to be respectable in the scientific world. And the Freudians, that would have been what hurt worst. The Freudians are going to take over everything. And a good Jungian will not yet let the Freudians do that if he can do something about it. So he said, well, all right. And then what he finally hit on, I have to mention that, was that he could disguise in a very clever and yet very meaningful way. He could disguise, you might say, his occult message, his transcendental message, his spiritual message. He could disguise it as alchemy. And he started writing his alchemical books. And he wrote no more, I am aware, because I have that many somewhere among my stuff. He has at least 5 major books on alchemy. One book on alchemy after the other came out of Zurich. And I actually was with some of the psychology students in Innsbruck, and so they said, how come Dr. Jung writes all about alchemy? We thought that alchemy is all... it's all gone. That nobody. Well, I said, he sees in it a symbol system that is psychologically extremely important. And if you guys are going to be psychologists, then you should study it. And indeed, I think in that respect I was a good prophet, because only later, when things have changed quite a bit about that, did he, and not really until the time of the 7 Sermons to the Dead and following it, the Red Book, did he come out into the open and into print with his visionary and transcendental experiences, to which really next Friday and much of this series will be devoted to establish my credentials, if such is needed. I just remind you again that my first book of some notes that established me reasonably well as a writer was the Gnostic Jung and the 7 Sermons to the Dead, which became quite popular both in Jungian circles and outside. It was followed then by Jung and the Lost Gospels. And so, let's say, I have, and in various others later on, but being aware of this Gnostic and occult and theosophical streak in Jung's activities and work, I could see, maybe in some very different way, not in the Theosophical Society, not just, maybe this is the one that Blavatsky wrote about, that in the 20th century that man will come who will bring forth the esoteric tradition, and in such a way that it will be of great interest to psychologists. Well, it did become of great interest to psychologists. And so, inasmuch as I got kind of going, which happens at times, I'll assure you that in all likelihood, that's how my assurances are. I assure you that in all likelihood I'm going to do. Maybe I'll do it, namely that it was my plan, and I have my notes even here, it was my plan that I would review for you a not very well-known lecture that Jung gave in London at an association of Church of England clergymen. How the poor man could stand it with that many priggish clergy, I don't know, but he did. You know, you've got to watch yourself with the Anglican, with the Church of England and the Episcopalian. And very intelligent people among them, but also some very obtuse ones. In any event, there was this association in London, and they invited various people, including psychologists, and Jung was there giving this particular talk, and the talk was entitled The Symbolic Life. And this was his first very complete, very precise statement of his attitude towards spiritual matters. Again, like the people nowadays who are they're all spiritual but not religious. Jung didn't mention much the word religion in the lecture, but it is about the religious function of the psyche, about what needs to be done, and how one should approach the spiritual realm. So it's a wonderful introduction to the field of religion, to the field of the occult, to the field of the mystical, and it was published because that clerical association published in little pamphlets the lectures that were delivered there, and I have a copy of it, and I have many quotations. So in any event, that was his first step, where he actually owned up to the fact that he was interested in spiritual things, and that there was something very important in religion, even though many of the religions didn't know what they have. That's pretty much what he did. And just completely finishing it off, my late friend, and I suppose I could consider him my teacher, Dr. Lawrence Bendit of London, told that he was there at several of subsequently to lectures that Jung gave. And he said it was really a relief, because before that there came all these mostly Freudian psychologists from Vienna, from Berlin, and said they gave the most boring talks. That he was thinking in advance of what fantasies he could weave while the talk was going on. And Jung walked into the room, and just by walking into the room, I knew immediately he was somebody. This was different. This was somebody else, and it is some kind of a great and important man. And he was right. He was right. He was right. And so I'll give you some of those as to how the ideas about spirituality took root in Jung, and how they developed from there, and then how they eventually were funneled into the Red Book and things of that sort. Because this time I'd like to have a sort of a nice little progression of Jung from the time that he had seances with his cousin to the time that he wrote the Red Book. And if I can accomplish that, then I'll do the Hungarian charters, even though my walk is so bad that I can't stand. I don't, you know. But if you get to be 93 years old, you won't be able to stand much either. But in any event, I'll be happy to do it, and we will see how Jung developed the title of that lecture that we'll have next time is The Symbolic Life. And he felt that is what religion is all about. When you leave the symbols, and the symbols begin to stimulate the God within. and then you will see a little more about it. So anyway, thank you so much for coming. I hope that this was not a disappointment, but this is, I think, a good general introduction to Jung the esotericist. Thank you so much.